I shouldn't be telling you any of this. A sheriff's badge isn't just tin and polish. It's a promise to shoulder certain truths alone. But the mountains refuse to keep quiet anymore, and the coal seams under Boone County have begun humming again, low, mournful, like a song meant for no living ear. I've heard that sound twice before in my career, and both times, death followed so quickly it felt rehearsed. You don't have to believe me. God knows I've tried not to. Yet if you've ever sensed a place watching you, or felt something slip out of the world, without warning, then listen carefully. I'm not sharing this for comfort. I'm sharing it because someone needs to understand what's waking beneath us. And because once the minds begin to sing, you've already stepped onto the path they choose next. The thing about Boone County is that the land remembers more than the people do. After I left the station that morning, the memory of the humming still clung to me like cold dust, fine enough to slip into the seams of your clothes, your thoughts, your bones. Out here, the mountains rise and fall like a tired animal breathing, and every hollow road feels like a vein running through something much older and warier than us. I've spent 27 years patrolling these ridges, and I can tell when the land is restless. That morning, it felt like something underneath was shifting in its sleep. Most folks don't see what I see on my rounds. They drive the highways. I drive the forgotten paths, mud/mining roads where abandoned tipples sag like broken ribs, and rustic conveyors still cling to the hillsides out of stubborn habit. Some days, when the fog settles right and the wind threads through the steel scaffolds, you could swear the old machines are speaking. Not humming, not yet, just remembering what they used to do before the mines dried up and the men who fed them either died or left. Generations here were bound to coal the way others are bound to bloodlines. My father mined and his father before him. I didn't follow them underground, but the work lived in our household like another member of the family. Its dangers, its rituals, its griefs. People from the outside think miners were reckless. They weren't. They were cautious to the point of superstition. Every gesture meant something. Every rule had a cost written into it. I learned that young, before I ever wore a badge. My deputy, Mason Riley, certainly knew those rules too, though he'd grown up after the boom. He was waiting for me beside the cruiser when I pulled up the ridge road. 24, eager, bright-eyed in a way this region usually beats out of people early. His grandfather had been swallowed by the old Langston shaft collapse before Mason was even born, but grief tends to echo louder than blood. He carried that loss like a birthright. "You look tired, Sheriff," he said, climbing in. "Didn't sleep much." He buckled his seat belt without pushing. He could read me better than most. Because of the call, I didn't answer. The quiet between us stretched just long enough for him to understand he shouldn't press. Not yet. We drove through Black Ridge Hollow, past a row of sagging houses clinging to the mountainside. Boone County had lost half its young families in the past decade, and the ones who stayed did so, because leaving would have meant abandoning something sacred, history, graves, debts. In Appalachia, you don't walk away from what raised you, even when it starts whispering back. Dispatch radioed in just as the road curved toward the old mine entrance. "Sheriff, you still en route to Black Ridge?" Caller reported unusual ground activity, possibly seismic. "Copy," I said. "We're 2 minutes out." Mason shifted in his seat. "Unusual in what way?" I kept my eyes on the narrowing road. "You read the statement." I read. She said the ground was singing. The way he said it, quiet, almost curious, made something behind my ribs tighten. Outsiders might laugh at phrasing like that. Locals don't. Report it in those words, and people listen. "We'll check for slate pressure shifts first." I said. "Wind pockets," ventilation echoes. Could be nothing, but he caught the edge in my voice. "And if it's not?" I didn't answer that either. The entrance to Black Ridge Mine sat behind a chain-link fence that had done little to deter teenagers over the years. The county sealed the shaft a decade ago after structural tests showed severe instability. The last official visit had been 5 years back, for seismic readings. Even then, The engineers rushed through the inspection like they couldn't wait to be somewhere, anywhere else. We stepped out of the cruiser. The mountain loomed above us, dark, unmoving, watchful. "Sheriff," Mason asked. "Yeah, you want me to call for clearance?" He already knew the answer. Protocol was clear. Rule 1, never enter a dormant shaft without seismic clearance. We hadn't entered yet, but even approaching the drift mouth without checking readings made me uneasy, and rules in mining country aren't meant to be bent. They're written in the names of dead men. "No entry today," I said. "We're just verifying the report. Eyes and ears only." He nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. Mason wanted to prove himself. That hunger could either make him a good deputy or get him killed. We walked along the perimeter, boots crunching on frost-hardened mud. Snowmelt trickled down the slope in thin, glistening threads. The air felt colder than it should have, colder than the weather could justify. Then, faint as breath on glass, it came, a sound beneath the earth. Not wind, not machinery, not any geological shift I'd ever heard. 3 tones, evenly spaced, measured, melodic, like someone plucking at strings deep underground, tuning something ancient. Mason stopped mid-step. "Did you?" "Yes," I said, sharper than I meant. The notes faded as quickly as they come, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt deliberate. "That wasn't wind," he whispered. "No." I tried to keep the tremor out of my voice. Could be trapped air pockets. Temperature changes in the strata. "You don't believe that." I exhaled slowly. "Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is procedure." He looked at me then, really looked, the way someone might study their mentor for the first sign of hesitation. "Sheriff, why did my granddad's crew write those rules?" My mom always said there were more than once. There were. Rules no one wrote down. Rules whispered in break rooms, muttered in low voices when the shadows stretched wrong. Rule 3. Never speak the names of the dead near the drift mouth. That one survived because it was the least dangerous to repeat. Mines are dangerous places. I finally said, "Names carry weight. Memories can distract you." He didn't buy it, but he didn't push. Truth was, I couldn't tell him the real reason. Not here. Not with the air around us feeling like it had begun to listen. The humming started again. Longer this time. 1 minute is the threshold. Miners learned that the hard way. If the vibration lasted longer than 60 seconds, you evacuated the ridge. Rule 2. The mountain warns before it takes. I looked at my watch. The tones held steady. 30 seconds. 40. 50. A shudder ran up my spine, though the ground didn't move at all. It was the steadiness that terrified me. Natural tremors fluctuate. Air pockets wheeze and collapse. But the sound, this perfectly measured resonance, felt intentional. "Sheriff," Mason said, "should we call in seismic?" "Yes." "Do it now." He reached for the radio, but the humming cut off at 58 seconds, like it knew the rules, like it wanted us to know it knew. He lowered the radio slowly. "Jesus." I swallowed the curse rising in my throat, not because I'm religious, because something about that moment felt like profanity might draw attention we didn't want. When I finally spoke, my voice barely carried. "We're not going near the drift mouth." "Why not?" "We need to see if the ground shifted." "Not today." Then when I didn't answer, couldn't, the memory of an earlier humming, a different cadence, a different tragedy, rose unbidden. The faces of the men we never recovered. The one shadow we saw move after we swore, everyone else was dead. The whispers had followed for weeks after that collapse. The mountain keeps score. It calls for its due. Back then, I'd chalked it up to grief, to shock, to men trying to understand the senseless. But hearing Black Ridge sing now, in a rhythm I'd never heard before, made something old and buried within me stir. Whatever was beneath us wasn't repeating history. It was changing it. "Sheriff," Mason said softly, "the humming, did it seem different to you?" I met his eyes. He needed truth, just not all of it. "Yes," I admitted, which means we follow protocol twice as carefully. And if protocol is enough, for a moment, I saw what he couldn't. The figure we glimpsed years ago, outlined by flickering helmet lamps, standing where no man should have stood. We handle what comes when it comes, I said. We started back toward the cruiser. But I couldn't stop myself from glancing over my shoulder. The mine entrance yawned in the dim winter light. A black mouth waiting for a breath. Halfway to the car, the tones returned. 3 notes, the same pattern, but colder now, sharper, like they'd noticed us turning away. Mason froze. Sheriff, I hear it. What do we do? I didn't know how to answer, because there was no protocol for this sound. No rule written for what happens when the mountain changes its voice. But I knew one thing. Humming that precise meant intention, and intention meant something down there had woken enough to take interest. We log it, I said quietly. We report it, and tomorrow we come back with seismic. And today, we leave. We reached the cruiser, and just as I put the key in ignition, the humming cut off again, clean, sudden, deliberate. The silence that followed felt like a hell breath. As we drove down the ridge, I saw Mason watching the mountains in the side mirror, as though expecting something to follow. I didn't tell him to stop looking. Part of me needed to know whether the silence stayed behind us or came along. We were halfway to the station when dispatch called in a new report. A missing miner, last seen near Black Ridge. The humming had started early, and it wasn't finished. We reached the mine road before the sun fully cleared the ridge, the cruiser tires grinding over gravel still slick with frost. Dispatch had confirmed the missing man's name, Jonah Klein, and the moment I heard it, a cold knot settled behind my ribs. Jonah wasn't a wanderer. He wasn't a drinker. He wasn't the type to run off or forget to check in. He'd been raised by these mountains, shaped by them the way iron or is shaped by heat. If Jonah was missing, something had taken him from where he meant to be. Black Ridge Mine looked different in the early light, less like an abandoned operation, and more like a mouth waiting for breath. The humming had stopped, for now, but the silence felt tight, stretched in over something that didn't want to be quiet. Mason stepped out beside me. Equipment everywhere, he said softly. He was right. Helmets scattered across the ground. A lunch pail overturned. 2 carbide lamps lying meters apart. Nothing torn, nothing broken, just set down as if their owners were interrupted mid-thought. At the cruiser, I opened my logbook. My pen hovered. Writing the words felt like inviting them to stay longer than they should. Humming pattern consistent with Langston collapse. Layered tones. Duration variable. Possible repetition. My hand shook once. I steadied it. I'd promised myself after Langston I would never put those patterns into words again. But protocol required documentation, and documentation required honesty. Even the kind I wished I hadn't heard. Sheriff, Mason asked as I closed the book. Yeah. Why are you afraid of the singing? He looked so young then. Too young to be asking questions with answers that don't leave people the same. I met his eyes. I almost told him. Almost let the truth slant open between us. Instead, I said, seal the site. No one goes near the drift until seismic comes. That doesn't answer my question. I shut the logbook hard enough to echo. It wasn't a question you were ready for. Before he could respond, the wind carried a faint tremor across the ridge, one single tone, sharp and deliberate, almost like acknowledgement. Mason turned toward the mine, confused. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Whatever was waking under Black Ridge had noticed us. And it wasn't done. After we sealed the drift and packed up the equipment, Mason drove us back toward the station. The humming had faded behind us, but its echo clung to my bones, reverberating in places no sound should be able to reach. Mason kept glancing at me as he drove, quiet, unsettled, chewing the inside of his cheek like he was holding back a dozen questions. I knew those questions. I'd asked the same ones once, when I was younger, hungrier, more hopeful about what the world was supposed to be instead of what it really was. By the time we reached the station, my hands were trembling. Not enough for anyone else to see. Just enough to remind me I hadn't outrun my past nearly as well as I liked pretend. Sheriff, Mason said as we stepped inside, I need to know what's going on. What you aren't telling me. I didn't answer him. Not yet. I walked past the front desk, past the coffee pot, into my office. When I closed the door behind me, he followed anyway. "I'm your deputy," he said, voice firm. "You can't keep shutting me out." I sat heavily in my chair, stared at the framed map of Boone County on the wall. So many ridges, so many old wounds buried beneath them. "What you heard out there," I said quietly, "isn't new to me." That stopped him. "What do you mean?" I rubbed a hand across my jaw. The skin felt tight, stretched thin. "I heard the same thing once before," I said, "years ago, before you were even in high school." He stepped closer. "What happened?" The memory rose sharp and unwelcome. A blade I'd kept sheathed for decades. I exhaled slowly. I was a deputy then, fresh out of academy. Thought a badge meant I understood danger. A humorless laugh escaped me. I had no idea. The Langston shaft collapsed. I hadn't said those words aloud in years. Even thinking them made my throat dry. It started with a hum. I said, "Like today, but deeper." You didn't hear it with your ears at first. You felt it in the floorboards, in the walls, like the whole valley was holding its breath. Mason sat across from me, eyes fixed. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he leaned forward slightly, bracing for whatever came next. The collapse killed 7 men. My voice came out rough. We recovered 6. And the 7th? I swallowed. Never found. No remains. No equipment. Nothing. Silence stretched between us, taut and humming in its own way. One of the survivors, I continued, was half mad when we pulled him out. He'd been pinned by a beam, barely breathing. His eyes were wild, like he was seeing something behind us. He kept repeating the same sentence. Mason didn't blink. What did he say? I forced the words out. He didn't fall. He followed something. A chill rolled through the room as if the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Followed what? Mason whispered. I asked him. He couldn't answer. Or wouldn't. He just shook and cried until the medics sedated him. I leaned back, fighting the old tightness in my chest. That was the day I learned the unspoken rule. Something miners only whispered about, but always obeyed. Mason straightened. Which rule? To never acknowledge the singing aloud. I met his eyes. Because it listens. He stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face before fading into something heavier. Sheriff, you're serious. I wish I wasn't. He pushed up from the chair, pacing. And you didn't tell me sooner? After Jonah? After the humming started again? I was trying to keep you safe. I said, safe? He stopped suddenly. People are missing. Jonah's gone. And you're telling me you kept quiet because of some superstition? It's not superstition. I snapped. It's experience. He recoiled slightly, not from fear, no, from betrayal. That hurt more than the heat in his voice. You trusted me less than whatever's out there, he said softly. Before I could answer, movement caught my eye. A flicker. A shift. My office window reflected both of us. But the reflection lagged behind reality by a heartbeat. Mason turned his head, and the mirror version followed late, like someone puppeteering from a second too slow. My breath turned to ice. Not again. I stood abruptly. The reflection froze entirely for a fraction of a second before snapping back into sync. What is it? Mason asked, alarmed. Nothing. I lied. But it wasn't nothing. It hadn't been nothing at Langston either. Reflections were always the first sign, right before things got worse. I grabbed my coat. We're going back to the ridge. Mason blinked. Why? Seismic hasn't cleared yet. I don't care. And protocol? Protocol. That word sat wrong in my mouth now. Protocol meant order, predictability. Human rules for a world humans were supposed to understand. But Black Ridge wasn't following human rules anymore. As we walked toward the cruiser, my reflection in the glass door again lagged by half a second. It stared back at me with an expression I wasn't making. I kept walking. Mason drove this time. The tension between us sat thick in the cab. Halfway up the ridge road, we passed county officials' SUVs. They flagged us down, insisting on updates, insisting the disappearance stay quiet, insisting the mine remain unofficially inaccessible until further instruction. Tourism's delicate, one suit told me. We can't have stories about haunted mines or geological instability. It isn't haunted, I muttered. We need this handled cleanly, he continued, quietly. Meaning, don't scare the county. Don't scare the investors. Meaning, follow the rules that keep their reputation safe. I wanted to tell them the mountain didn't care about reputations, that whatever lived under Black Ridge had never once considered the county's economic worries. But I bit down on the impulse. County officials don't listen to sheriffs when fear is at stake. They listen even less when the fear is justified. After they left, Mason leaned against the cruiser. They want us to pretend nothing's happening. They want plausible deniability. And what do you want? I stared up the slope toward the mine where Jonah had vanished. Snowmelt glimmered like thin veins of silver running down the rock. The drift mouth was invisible from here, but I felt it like a pulse in the ground. I won't bring Jonah home, I said. But if we go in with a full search party, someone else might disappear. So what's the alternative? I hesitated. A limited crew. He frowned. Smaller increases the risk. I know. Then why? Because anything bigger will draw its attention faster. He fell silent, not in agreement, but in realization. The thing humming beneath the ridge wasn't simply dangerous. It was aware. We're going back in, he said quietly. Aren't we? We have to. And you think someone might die because of it. I do. He looked at me, really looked, and for a moment the hurt between us softened into something else. Fear, yes, but also understanding. When do we leave? He asked. Tomorrow at dawn. Mason nodded once. Determined. Terrified. I envied him the simplicity of that kind of bravery. We got back into the cruiser. As he started the engine, I saw our reflections again in the side mirror, both of us staring forward, both of us grim. Then, just as the engine rumbled to life, the mirror version of me turned its head and looked directly at the mine. I did not move. My blood chilled. I said nothing. Mason didn't notice. The humming was waiting for us. And tomorrow at dawn, we'd be stepping straight into its throat. Dawn came gray and thin over Black Ridge, the kind of light that struggled to penetrate the hollows. The humming had stopped sometime during the night, but its absence felt more ominous than its presence ever had. Silence can be a warning, too, especially in mining country. Mason met me at the cruiser with dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept. Neither had I. The volunteers arrived a few minutes later. Curtis Hall, a part-time EMT with reckless need to prove himself, and Mark Weaver, a seasoned hunter who thought the mountains only held dangers he could name. Neither man understood what waited beneath Black Ridge, and I didn't have the heart or the evidence to convince him otherwise. Sometimes the truth is too heavy to hand to someone who still believes danger looks like something with teeth. You ready? Mason asked quietly. No, but I nodded. We crossed the fence line and approached the drift mouth. Cold air slid out of the shaft like an exhale, brushing across my face with unnatural precision. Not a breeze, not a draft, a breath. I felt it ripple across my skin, measured, rhythmic, alive. We stick to the plan, I said, keeping my voice steady. Central passage, slow pace, no separation. Headlamps on high. If radios fail, we stay in physical contact. If the humming starts, we assess immediately. Curtis grinned nervously. So just a casual stroll underground in the condemned mine. Pretty much, Mark muttered. Mason didn't smile. He kept his eyes on me, waiting for reassurance I didn't have. We descended into the dark. Light faded fast behind us, swallowed by the shaft's black throat. Our headlamps carved thin tunnels of illumination through dust motes drifting like ash. The deeper we went, the colder the air grew, not in a gradual way but in distinct pulses, as though something deep below inhaled, paused, exhaled again. Curtis shivered. Feels like we're walking into a freezer. It's breathing, Mason whispered before he realized he'd spoken. Nobody laughed. Nobody corrected him. The first sign that reality was beginning to slip came 20 minutes in. Sheriff, a voice said behind me. Mason's voice. But Mason was walking ahead of me. I stopped cold, every muscle locking. I'd heard that tone before, not here, not in this mine, but at Langston, right before the survivor whispered his final warning. I turned slowly. "Sheriff," Mason asked from the front of the line. "I thought you said something," I said. He frowned. "I didn't." Mark glanced between us. "Echo maybe?" No. There hadn't been an echo in Black Ridge since before the newer shafts were dug. And the voice hadn't come from a distance. It had been inches behind my shoulder, warm enough that I'd felt the breath. We kept moving. As we advanced, the distortion grew worse. Our shadows stretched across the walls like they were being pulled by unseen hands. Sometimes the shadows delayed, lagging just enough to unsettle the eye. Other times they twisted into shapes that didn't match our movements at all. Headlamps flickering, Curtis muttered. "Anyone else seeing that?" They were flickering, but not randomly. They pulsed in sync with the faint hum rising from the depths, an almost inaudible resonance that vibrated through the slate like a tuning fork. Ahead of us, the dust patterns shifted. Boot prints. Fresh. Deep. Jonah's. At first they seemed normal. Then I noticed the spacing. 4 feet between steps. Then 5. Then 7. No human stride was that long unless running, or unless something was moving him. "Mason," I said quietly, "don't touch them." Wasn't planning to, but he was staring at them too long, jaw tight, eyes wide, as though he were seeing something within the prints the rest of us couldn't. We followed the trail deeper until the shaft widened into a high-roof chamber. Our light shimmered strangely off the walls, reflecting in streaks like polished obsidian. The air felt thicker here, not in a suffocating way, but in a listening way, like the whole room waited for us to speak. At the far end of the chamber, a figure stood. "Jonah?" Mason whispered. The man didn't move at first. His stance was familiar, near the left wall, head slightly tilted as if checking equipment. But when he finally turned, every hair on my body stood on end. His face wasn't a face. It was mirrored stone, smooth, reflective, shaped loosely like a human profile, but utterly featureless. Our own reflection stared back at us from its surface, distorted but identifiable, except the reflection smiled. None of us were smiling. Curtis choked out a curse. Mark took a step back. Mason reached for his gun but froze, unable to complete the motion. "Jonah?" I tried again, though I knew there was no Jonah left in whatever stood there. The humming surged. Not tones this time. Voices. Layered whispers sliding over each other like shifting plates. The air vibrated so violently it rattled my teeth. The figure moved. No, it didn't. The shadows around it moved, stretching outward in unnatural shapes, as if the chamber itself were drawing breath to pull us in. Curtis lost it first. He bolted toward the exit, headlamp swinging wildly. "Nope, nope, I'm not dying here." "Curtis!" I shouted, but he didn't stop. His beam vanished into the darkness ahead. His footsteps echoed once, twice, then ceased abruptly. No scream, no collapse, just absence, swallowed whole by the mind. "Sheriff," Mark gasped, backing up. "What the hell was that?" "We can't stay," I said. But Mason wasn't listening. He was staring at the mirrored figure, lips parted in a whisper. "Granddad?" The sound of the humming shifted, molding itself into a melodic pattern, one soft, familiar cadence, a voice only Mason could hear. His face crumpled, grief blooming raw across his features. "Granddad, I hear you," he breathed. I grabbed him by the shoulder. "Mason, look at me." He didn't. The humming grew sharper, coercive, seductive, a beckoning from the depths of the slate. The chamber resonated like the ribs of some vast creature calling its lost children home. "Mason!" I roared. He flinched but didn't break loose from the pull. The reflections in the mirrored face shifted again. This time they weren't smiling. They were crying, reaching, pleading for him. I didn't think. Instinct took over, the same instinct that saved lives and cost lives over years. I hooked my arm around Mason's chest and hauled him backward with every ounce of strength I had. He screamed, not in pain, but in heartbreak, like something was being torn out of him. "Sheriff, wait, he's right there." "He's not." I snapped. "Whatever that is, it's not him." Mark grabbed Mason's other arm, helping me drag him toward the exit passage. The humming rose to a keening howl behind us, a sound so powerful it nearly drove me to my knees. The mirrored figure stepped forward. Just one step. The slate beneath it glimmered like black water, rippling outward, inviting, expanding, alive. We ran. Dust swirled around us in furious spirals. The floor vibrated with rhythmic pulses, like a heartbeat trying to sync itself with our own. The mind exhaled with each surge of the humming, pushing cold air down the passage toward us. We didn't stop until the faintest sliver of daylight sliced through the darkness ahead. Mason stumbled, gasping, tears streaking through his coal dust-smeared face. Behind us, the humming cut off. Not faded. Cut off. Cleanly. Deliberately. Like something had closed its mouth. We burst into daylight, collapsing beside the ridge fence. Mark doubled over, heaving. Mason wiped his face with shaking hands, eyes red and haunted. "Curtis," he whispered. We left him. I closed my eyes. Protocol dictated we search for him immediately. But instinct, the same instinct that had dragged Mason out alive, told me that stepping back inside would only finish what the mind had started. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "We can't go back. Not today." Mason stared at me with disbelief, betrayal, and grief twisted together. "We can't just leave him." "We already did," I said. The mind behind us exhaled again, soft, almost satisfied, and that was when I realized the humming hadn't been calling for Jonah. It had been waiting for someone else all along. By the time we reached the station, the sun sat high above the ridge, but none of us felt its warmth. Mason hadn't spoken the entire drive back. His hands rested motionless on his knees, fingers curled as though he were still reaching for something inside the mind, something he believed he'd lost forever. Mark trailed behind us silently, eyes hollow, his gait uneven. None of us mentioned Curtis. Saying his name aloud felt like opening a door we weren't ready to face. Inside my office, I closed the blinds, locked the door, and stared at the incident report form glowing on my computer screen. Collapse risk ongoing. I typed unstable ground, structural anomalies, environmental hazards. Words chosen carefully, deliberately. Each one meant to nudge the county away from questions they didn't want answered. I didn't write about the mirrored face, the shifting shadows, the way the mind breathed. I didn't write that it watched us leave. And I didn't write that we'd abandoned a man inside. If the town read the truth, panic would spread faster than wildfire in a drought. Fear turns neighbors against each other. Desperation pushes families into danger. I'd seen it before. I wasn't going to let it happen again. A knock sounded at the door. "Sheriff." Mason's voice. I closed the falsified report and opened the door. His face was pale, drawn tight around the eyes. "You all right?" I asked. "No," he said simply. "It knew me." He sat heavily in the chair opposite mine. When I heard my grandfather's voice, it wasn't just memory. It recognized me. It wanted me. I sank into my own chair. "Mason, you didn't hear what I heard." He rubbed a hand through his hair. It wasn't just calling. It was choosing. My chest tightened. He wasn't wrong. The humming had molded itself around him. The reflections had lingered a little too long on his form. The mind had taken interest. "Mason, listen," I said. "You are shaken. Anyone would be after what happened." "No," his voice broke. "This is more than trauma." He stared at the floor. "Curtis is gone because I froze. If I hadn't—" "You can't take that on yourself," I said, sharper than intended. "The mind chose. It wasn't you." He swallowed, but the guilt stayed carved into his expression. Before I could say more, a soft knock sounded. Elias Crow stepped inside, hat in his hands. His face was ashen. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Mason straightened. "About the mine?" "Ayu." Elias's eyes flicked toward me. "About what it wants." I motioned him inside. He remained standing, shoulders slumped. There's an old story, he began, been passed down since the first shaft sank into these mountains. My granddad told it. His granddad told him. You don't hear much anymore. Folks don't like remembering the debts that linger. What kind of debts? Mason asked. Elias looked at him steadily. The mountain takes what you owe. The words hung heavy in the room. Oh, I asked. Curtis didn't. Elias shook his head. It's not about wrongdoing. It's about imbalance. Something gets taken. Something must be given. Something wakes. Something must be fed. Men go where they shouldn't. Stones shift where they shouldn't. And the mountain keeps score. Mason's knuckles whitened. Then why Jonah? Why the others? Old blood, maybe, Elias murmured. Old grief. Old promises. Some families are tied tighter to the ridge than others. I thought of Mason's grandfather. I thought of the mirrored figure. And for the first time, I wondered whether the mine had known Mason long before he walked inside. After Elias left, the station buzzed with tension. Word of Curtis's disappearance had spread despite my attempts to contain it. By evening, the community hall filled with families, angry, afraid, desperate. The mayor called an impromptu meeting, and although I dreaded it, I showed up. My badge demanded it. The room erupted the moment I stepped inside. What really happened in that mine? Why did you take our boys down there? Why isn't the state involved? Voices layered over each other until they became a roar. The mayor raised her hands, trying to regain control, but fear had already taken the reins. Then a woman pushed through the crowd, her cheeks streaked with tears. Rachel Hall, Curtis's wife. She stood in front of me, trembling. Sheriff, she said softly, please, just tell me you're going back in for him. The room fell silent. Rachel's eyes, red but fierce, locked onto mine. He wouldn't leave you, she whispered. He wouldn't leave anyone. You know that. Please bring him home. Guilt twisted through me like barbed wire. I opened my mouth, searching for the right words, the right lie, the right comfort. But all that came out was, I can't. Her face crumpled. The room erupted again, shouts, demands, accusations, but her grief drowned them out. She covered her mouth, choking back sobs. Mason stepped forward as if to comfort her, but she flinched away, her pain too raw for touch. I excused myself as calmly as possible, though my hands shook. Outside, the night air felt sharp enough to cut. I leaned against the side of the building, tried to breathe through the weight settling on my chest. A flicker caught my eye. In the window's reflection, I saw myself clearly, shoulders hunched, face strained. But behind me, standing just inside the dim hall, was Curtis. Not Curtis as he had been that morning. Curtis with dust on his clothing. Curtis with darkness clinging to the edges of his form. Curtis perfectly still. I spun around. The space behind me was empty. My reflection, however, remained wrong for several seconds, still showing him long after reality had caught up. When it finally blinked back into sync, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I walked quickly to the cruiser, trying to convince myself my mind was fraying under stress. But deep down, I knew the truth. The humming wasn't bound to the mind anymore. On the drive home, headlights carved tunnels of light across the forest road. The darkness felt thicker tonight, heavier. Listening, halfway to my house, a faint vibration crawled up to the steering wheel. At first, I thought it was the tires on rough gravel. Then I heard it, soft, low, unmistakable. The hum. I braked hard, pulling onto the shoulder. The sound threaded itself through the trees, something impossible echoing where no mind existed. It pulsed in slow intervals, calling, testing, learning. It had followed me. It had left the ridge. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. Not here, I whispered. Not now. But the mountain didn't obey distance. It didn't obey reason. It followed its own accounting, and it had begun collecting. When the humming finally faded, I drove straight back to town, to one place I hoped still held answers, Elias Crow's house. His porch light burned weakly, flickering in the wind. He stepped outside before I knocked, as though he'd been waiting for me. It's begun, he said simply. Yes, I answered. It's outside the mine now. He nodded slowly. It's searching. For what? For who? He corrected. His eyes rested on me. You know the mountain remembers debts. You know it doesn't stop once it starts counting. I shivered. How do we stop it? Elias's expression darkened. You can't stop it. You can only offer something. My stomach dropped. What kind of something? Something of equal weight. He touched my arm gently. You feel it, don't you? It's closer to you than the rest. I thought of the reflection, the voice calling Mason, the mirrored eyes in the slate. Yes, I whispered. I feel it. Elias exhaled. Then be careful, Sheriff. The next time it calls, it won't be from afar. The wind lifted, brushing cold across the porch. I felt the hum return. Not sound exactly, but pressure, a distant promise. It was coming. Not for Curtis. Not for Jonah. Not for Mason. For me. And dawn wasn't far. The humming woke me before dawn. Not loud, never loud, but present. Threaded through the early morning stillness like a low, steady heartbeat. I lay in bed for several seconds, hoping it was just memory, the echo of yesterday's terror replaying through my nerves. But the sound pulsed again, faint yet deliberate, humming through the window glass as though the mountains themselves were whispering against the pain. I sat up fast. Something was wrong. Wrong in a way the air already knew. When I grabbed my radio, the static had a rhythm behind it. 3 pulses, then silence, then 3 more. Black Ridge's new cadence. Its new voice. I didn't bother dressing fully. Just pulled on boots and shrugged into a jacket before racing to my cruiser. The humming intensified as I drove, never directional, never centered, flowing along the road like fog. It stayed equal no matter how quickly I drove, no matter how sharp the turns. It wasn't coming from the ridge. It was coming for something, or someone. When the trees finally broke enough for me to see the lot near the fence line, my stomach tightened. Mason's patrol car sat parked crookedly beside the old service road, headlights off, driver door open. The interior dome light burned weakly against the gloom. Mason, I called, stepping out. No answer. I circled the vehicle. His radio sat on the driver's seat, switched off. His jacket hung on the mirror. His flashlight lay on the ground, beam still on, angled toward the woods behind the mine. A smear of black dust streaked the driver's side door. Cold dust, fresh, the kind that shouldn't have been anywhere near the forest. I crouched beside the smear, rubbing the dust between my fingers. Slate, coal fragments, fine particulate, identical to what we tracked inside the mine 2 days earlier. The trail continued away from the car, a loose scattering that glinted faintly in the beam of my flashlight. Mason, I whispered, what did you follow? I started toward the woods, every instinct screaming to turn back, but the humming grew louder, still distant, still everywhere, but stronger now, as if the trees were carrying from branch to branch. It wasn't a warning. It was a lure, and Mason had heard it first. I followed the cold dust deeper into the forest, moving quickly, scanning for any sign of him. The trail thickened in places, clumped on roots and stones like something had brushed past him with increasing weight. My breath fogged in front of me despite the mild morning air. 10 minutes into the woods, a memory slammed into me without warning. Langston, the collapse, the 7th man not found. I saw the scene again. The tunnel half caved, dust clouds hanging like smoke, the survivor sobbing into my chest as medics carried him out. His cracked voice haunted my ears even now. He didn't fall. He followed something. And behind that, buried deeper, a detail I'd never allowed myself to examine too closely. The name of the missing miner. Riley, Mason's grandfather. I stumbled to a stop. My heart hammered painfully, drowning out the humming for one breathless second. It made sense now, in the way terrible things often do. The entity didn't choose randomly. It didn't hunt indiscriminately. It took from bloodlines. Jonah, 4th-generation miner. Curtis, descendant of family that once held the first ridge rights. And Mason, son of the man who had survived the collapse, grandson of the one who hadn't. Generational lines. Debts passed like inheritance. Mason, I shouted, panic ripping through my voice. The humming answered, not beside me, not behind me, but everywhere at once, vibrating to the ground, weaving through the air like rope tightening around my chest. I ran. The cold dust trail curved sharply toward a side ravine, descending in a slope too steep for casual travel. Mason must have slid or stumbled here. Handprints marked the mud, smears of cold dust lining each indentation. My lungs burned as I followed the ravine downward until the trees parted enough for me to see the mine again, its sealed entrance a dark wound in the hillside. The humming wasn't behind me anymore. It came from below. I sprinted toward the drift mouth. Mason! I yelled again, voice breaking. Answer me. Silence. Then, faint, strained, a single echo. Sheriff. I froze, breath caught in my throat. That voice. It sounded like him, but stretched in, echoing strangely through the mine's outer corridors. I stepped closer, pressing my palm to the cold metal seal. The humming intensified, vibrating through the steel like it recognized my touch. Sheriff, the voice whispered again, except it wasn't quite right. The rhythm, the inflection, just a shade too slow, as if spoken by someone listening for my response before shaping theirs. A mimic, not Mason. Not yet. I stepped back, heart slamming against my ribs. Rule number 3 burned in my memory. Never speak the names of the dead near the drift mouth. But Mason wasn't dead. Not if I moved now. Not if I reached him first. I'm coming for you, I whispered. Not to the mine, not to the voice, but to myself. Decision settled in my bones, heavy but sure. I unlatched my belt, pulled out bolt cutters from the emergency kit in my cruiser, and cut the chains sealing the entrance. Each snap of metal echoed like a gunshot in the cold morning air. County protocols, state regulations, every safety rule I'd ever enforced. I broke them all in seconds. Rule number 1, never enter a dormant shaft without seismic clearance. I stepped inside. The air closed around me instantly, colder than before, sharp enough to sting my throat. Darkness pressed in, swallowing the beam of my flashlight faster than it should have. The humming thickened, weaving itself through the walls, vibrating through my boots. Mason, I called, voice trembling despite my effort. No answer, just the drip of groundwater, just a pulse of the mountain's slow, deliberate breath. I pressed deeper, boots crunching across the damp stone. The mine changed around me, the familiar architecture bending subtly, corridors angling in ways they shouldn't, as though the place rearranged itself to lead me somewhere specific. The humming grew directional at last, pulling me right, then left, then down a narrow incline I didn't remember from our earlier descent. My flashlight flickered, but I kept walking, breath fogging in pale bursts. At the base of the incline, the humming softened, replaced by a faint whispering. My blood chilled. Mason, I tried again. Something shifted in the dark, and then I saw it, a shape moving at the end of the passage, caught in the dim fringe of my light. A silhouette, human, familiar. Mason. He stood still, head bowed slightly, hands at his sides. I ran toward him, relief breaking through panic. Mason! I gasped. Thank God. He lifted his head, too slowly, far too slowly. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflective, shimmering like wet slate. A thin ripple of mirrored sheen traced the edges of his face. No, I whispered. He wasn't fully taken. Not yet, but the mine had him. Still, I stepped forward. Mason, come with me. We can leave. Now. His lips parted. When he spoke, the voice wasn't his. Not fully. It overlapped with another, older, deeper, wrong. You followed. My breath caught. Those were the survivor's words from Langston. The words about his grandfather. The mine had learned them, had saved them, had waited to use them on me. I stepped back, heart racing, but I didn't run. Couldn't. Mason's outline trembled, flickering between himself and the mirrored glint beneath. I'm taking him back, I said aloud, to whatever listened in the stone. You've taken enough. The humming surged violently, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. The corridor behind me warped, edges blurring as if preparing to close. I tightened my grip on my flashlight. Then take me instead. The humming stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the mind inhaled, deep, slow, deliberate, and the passage ahead widened, shadows peeling back like the opening of a throat. Inviting me in, I stepped forward. Alone, the mind accepted me without resistance. As I stepped deeper, the passage behind me narrowed, as though the stone breathed in after swallowing me whole. My flashlight cast a thin beam across walls slick with moisture, but the deeper I went, the more the mind seemed to absorb the light before it touched anything solid. The air thickened, wet, metallic, pulsing with the rhythm of something vast moving far below. I followed the echo of the humming. Though it was no longer a single sound, two voices layered themselves in the vibrations. One young, taut with fear, Mason. The other older, low and resonant, carrying the weight of a memory I had tried to bury. His grandfather's voice. The realization tightened something cold around my heart. Generational lines. Elias had said, "Debts passed down." The mind didn't forget, and now it wanted to collect. I pushed forward. Soon the shaft dipped sharply, descending into corridors long erased from official maps. My father's generation talked about these places, the abandoned pre-war tunnels, carved before regulations, patched in crooked angles where the mountain had grown stubborn. No one had walked them in decades. No one alive. Anyway, my beam flickered across rotting timbers. The shadows they cast didn't fall where they should. When I turned off my flashlight to test the suspicion, the tunnel shifted, the walls bending minutely, subtly, as though relieved to no longer perform obedience to human geometry. When the light returned, the corridor straightened again. "Not real," I muttered, "just tricks of the dark." But the mind hummed in response, a low exhale through the stone that felt disturbingly like amusement. Deeper, farther, until at last, the narrow passage opened into a vast chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness, the air trembling with resonance. A faint glow emanated from somewhere within the floor, a pulsing light, soft and cold, tracing veins through the slate like bioluminescence. And there, at the edge of a gaping chasm, stood Mason. He faced the abyss motionless, head tilted slightly as if listening to a voice rising from the depths. His stance mirrored Jonah's earlier posture, a puppet suspended by invisible strings. "Mason," I called, keeping my voice steady. He didn't react. The humming grew clearer, not chanting, not breathing. A chorus, layered and discordant. Mason's voice threaded through it, and beneath it, his grandfather's. But they weren't words. They weren't even sounds shaped by breath. They were impressions, memories twisted into frequency. "Mason!" I stepped closer. As I approached, the glow strengthened, illuminating the far end of the chamber. A figure emerged from the shadows. It stepped forward with fluid, soundless movements, its shape humanoid, but its surface gleaming like polished obsidian. Mirror skin stretched across its form, reflecting not the environment but us, our faces, our bodies, our fear. Each reflection distorted in ways that bent the mind to stare at it too long. The reflection smiled. None of us did. It stopped between me and Mason, tilting its head like a curious animal. My breath hitched as its mirrored surface rippled with shifting images. Mason's face, then mine, then the faint outline of another man. "Riley, the missing one." My voice cracked. "You took him." The figure didn't move, but its surface shimmered and a layered voice emerged. One voice, two voices, 10 voices, a harmonic rumble that vibrated through my ribs. "You followed," it said. The same words it had spoken through Mason. The same words a survivor whispered after Langston. "You followed," it repeated, stepping closer. The reflections across its torso shifted, swirling like water disturbed by touch. As he did, I forced myself not to step back. "You have Mason. Let him go." It tilted its head, and my flashlight beam fractured across its surface into dozens of warped channels. "One leaves," it said. "One stays." A cold tremor ran through me. "Take me?" Behind the figure, Mason's fingers twitched. A single sign of life, enough to make my heart surge painfully. I offer myself, I said louder. Take me, leave him. The humming halted abruptly, as though the whole chamber inhaled at once. The figure approached slowly, its mirrored skin rippling with impressions of my face. I stood my ground even as the air thickened with its presence. 2 inches from me, its surface shifted again. An image of my father appeared, then vanished, replaced by the miner lost decades ago. Then the figure lowered its head. You already owe me, it said. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I whispered. The chamber shuddered as though the mountain itself exhaled. You broke the rule, it said. Long ago. Flashbacks surged through me. Langston, dust choking the air, a man muttering in delirium, me whispering something I was never supposed to say, a name of the dead spoken near the drift mouth, a name the mountain had heard. Riley. A chill swept through me from scalp to spine. You owe, the entity said, and the debt is due. The floor quaked violently. Slate fractured along the edges of the chasm. The rumbling grew louder, more violent, and the chamber's ceiling rained dust and shards. The collapse was beginning. Mason! I lunged past the figure. The entity didn't stop me. It didn't need to. The collapsing chamber would finish what it had started. I grabbed Mason's arm. His eyes flicked toward me, fog with trance, but recognition flickered there, faint, desperate. Sheriff, he murmured, voice trembling. I heard him. I know, I said. We're leaving. Now. The chamber jolted again, nearly knocking us off our feet. I threw Mason's arm over my shoulder, dragging him back toward the tunnel. The entity watched, unmoving, its mirrored face shifting with unreadable expressions. As we staggered away, the entity stepped into the path of falling stone. Not to block us, no, to follow. The humming surged, louder, sharper, driving needles of vibration through my ears. Mason winced. The tunnel ahead warped with dust clouds and shuddering beams. Hurry! I shouted. We scrambled through the narrowing passage as rocks exploded from the ceiling. Behind us, the entity advanced with slow, inevitable steps, untouched by the chaos, reflections rippling across a body like water under moonlight. The exit was close, just a bend away. When my legs buckled, a low-frequency wave rolled through the tunnel, knocking both of us to our knees. The entity was nearly upon us. Then, from far above, faint but clear, a human voice carried through the mine, singing, a tremulous, steady melody, a miner's rite, not pretty but purposeful, a tune meant not for beauty but for distraction, disruption, confusion. Elias, the entity, faltered. Its mirrored surface rippled violently, images distorting into chaos. The humming broke apart, unraveling into jagged dissonance. I seized a moment, hauling Mason upright with a strength fueled by terror. We stumbled the final yards just as the passage behind us collapsed inward, sealing the entity behind a wall of stone. We burst into daylight, coughing, bleeding, half collapsing against the ridge fence. The humming stopped. The mine fell silent. Elias's voice faded into wind. For the moment, the mountain had paused, but not surrendered. We cleared the ridge seconds before the mountain swallowed itself. The roar behind us started like a groan, low, trembling, then rose into a thunder that shook the spine of Black Ridge. Slate buckled inward. Dust erupted in a choking plume, clouding the air with gray ash that billowed across the clearing like storm surf. Mason and I collapsed beside the fence, lungs burning, shaking uncontrollably. The cold morning light caught the settling dust in gold streaks, turning destruction into something almost holy. Sheriff, Mason gasped, voice thin. It tried to pull me back. I know, I said, pulling him close. You're here. You're here with me. Just breathe. The ground trembled once more and then finally stilled. The hum, the terrible layered resonance that had filled our bones for days, broke into silence, so deep I could hear my own heartbeat pounding like a fist against my ribs. The mine was buried, not dead, not gone, but quiet. For now, authorities swarmed the site within an hour. Emergency crews, state geologists, county officials, reporters smelling tragedy like vultures circling a carcass. Tape went up. Drones mapped the collapsed entrance. Engineers pointed at stress fractures and seismic readings. Voices clipped with professional certainty. The word instability repeated like a mantra, a salve they hoped would soothe a town desperate for simple explanations. I said nothing. Not about the humming. Not about the mirrored figure. Not about the fact that something had followed Mason down the lineage of his blood. I stayed by Mason's side while paramedics checked him. His pulse spiked wildly whenever a distant vibration passed through the ground. Even normal movement, a vehicle starting, an engine rumbling, sent him flinching. His vitals are all over the place. One medic said quietly. Stress response. Trauma. He needs a hospital. They loaded him into an ambulance. For a moment, through the open doors, our eyes met. His were glassy, confused, terrified. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words that came weren't his. Do it still owes. The same fragmented syllables the hum had woven around him. Mason? I leaned inside, gripping his hand. They're not done, he whispered, voice shaking. Sheriff, they're not done with us. Then his eyes rolled back, and he went limp. The door slammed shut. By evening, news stations buzzed like hornets. Unexpected collapse. Structural failure. Ongoing investigation. Boone County residents gathered on porches, whispering about omens and debts, their fear thick as the dust still drifting through the air. I spent the night at the sheriff's office writing the report I knew they expected. Logical, sanitized, empty. Nothing in it resembled the truth. When I delivered it to the county board the next morning, they read it in silence. The mayor thumbed the edges of the pages, eyes narrowing. This is incomplete, she said. It's accurate. I replied, accurate would include details about why you entered a condemned mine with no clearance. I made a judgment call. A deadly one. She folded the report shut. We've spoken privately with the geologists. They insist the collapse was natural, but your behavior doesn't match a man who encountered a natural event. I held her gaze. I told you everything relevant. No, she said softly. You didn't. The room grew still. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Sheriff, the mayor continued, when a man refuses to answer direct questions about a fatal incident, there are consequences. I felt the weight of my badge even before she reached across the table. You're suspended pending further review. The badge lay in her outstretched hand, like something dead. I removed mine from my chest. The metal felt colder than usual. My father used to say losing a badge didn't strip you of duty, only a permission. I placed it gently in her palm. You're making a mistake. I said, perhaps, she replied, but it's one we can justify. I drove straight to the hospital. Mason slept restlessly, sweat beading across his forehead. His body twitched under the thin blanket, fingers flexing like he was reaching into darkness. I sat beside him, listening to his soft murmurs. At first they were unintelligible, fragments of memory, nightmare scraps. But then a familiar pattern emerged, a rhythm that prickled the hair on my arms. Under, listen, Riley follow, the hum's cadence. My jaw clenched. A nurse checked his four. He's been like this since admission, she said softly, talking in his sleep, whispering. Sometimes he sits straight up like he's waking, but his eyes don't focus. Has he said anything clearly? I asked. One sentence, repeated twice. She hesitated. He said, it wants balance. My chest tightened. Balance. Debt. Due. All the words Elias had warned us about now echoed through Mason's unconscious lips. I left the hospital near midnight. The parking lot was empty, the cold air sharp against my skin. The sky above Black Ridge was cloudless, revealing a scatter of stars dimmed by dust. I leaned against my truck and closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the ache in my ribs. A low sound threaded itself through the wind. My pulse jumped, but it wasn't humming, not layered, not inhuman. A voice. Human. Old. I followed the sound to the far end of the parking lot, where an ambulance sat dark and still. Behind it, someone stood slumped against the brick wall, head bowed. My heart stuttered. Elias. I whispered. He lifted his head slightly. His face looked thinner, waxy in the pale security light. His breath sounded fragile, each exhale rattling like dry leaves. I sang too loud, he said, voice barely audible. You saved us, I replied. You saved Mason. He shook his head weakly. Mountain listens, always listens. Every offering, every right, it counts a cost. My stomach plummeted. Elias, what did it take from you? His eyes, one sharp despite age, had dimmed to faint embers. Old debts, he murmured. Old blood. I knew the price. I stepped closer. Sit. You shouldn't be standing. But he slumped sideways before I reached him. I caught him under the shoulders, lowering him gently to the pavement. His skin was cold, far too cold for the mild night. Sheriff, he whispered, it's not done. He exhaled one final breath. It left his body with a faint sigh, as if the mountain were drawing it in. Elias Crow died quietly under the hospital lights with my hands around his shoulders and dust drifting across the asphalt. I sat with him for a long time, long after the nurses took him inside, long after the lot emptied again. The night pressed in heavy and still. Silence settled over Black Ridge. But it wasn't peace. It was waiting. The next morning, I returned to the mine's perimeter, badgeless, exhausted, grief wrapped tight in my chest. The county had barricaded the entire ridge with fresh fencing and warning signs. Troopers patrolled the road. I stood at the new barrier, staring at the collapsed slope. Slate fragments glittered like black glass in the pale light. A single thin plume of dust drifted upward, catching the sun like smoke from an unseen fire. My radio, though unused, vibrated once on my belt. A pulse, then another, faint, measured, the same rhythm Mason muttered in his sleep. The hum wasn't broken, just muted. Something beneath the ridge had gone silent long enough to rest, and now it was waking again. I closed my eyes, gripping the fence until the metal bit into my palms. Mason was still in danger. So was I. So was the whole damn county. A new tremor rippled through the ground. Small, subtle, easily mistaken for a truck passing on a distant road. But I knew better. The mountain wasn't done counting, and whatever dead it believed remained, would come due soon. The years after Black Ridge didn't pass so much as accumulate, layering themselves like sediment across a life I no longer recognized. I moved to a cabin 10 miles outside town, past the last paved road, past the rusted signs warning of old logging routes. I told the county I needed quiet, told Mason I needed space, told myself I needed time. None of those things were the truth. The real reason was simpler. I needed distance from a mountain, distance from its voice, its hunger, its memory. But land in Boone County doesn't care about distance. It carries its passed-away coal, carries pressure, silent, invisible, waiting. I became a recluse almost without trying. Days blurred into one another, marked only by coffee in the morning, wood cutting in the afternoon, and long hours on the porch, staring at the tree line until sunset bled into dusk. I read old mining journals. I thumbed through my father's faded notebook of shafts and safety rights. Sometimes I tried to sleep without dreaming, though I rarely succeeded. Mason visited occasionally, always giving me plenty of warning, texting first, then waiting by his car, as if crossing onto my porch required permission. He'd recovered physically, but the depth behind his eyes told me the mountain hadn't left him untouched. The humming lived in both of us now, a scar beneath the skin. One afternoon, 2 years after the collapse, he brought me a box of groceries and a small jar of honey from his mother. She says you never visit, he said. I'm not great company. I replied. You never were, he said with a faint smile. But you were dependable. I didn't answer. He sat beside me on the porch, watching the ridge in the distance. Though trees blocked most of the view, the silhouette of Black Ridge still rose above everything, darker than the rest of the mountains, as though the sun no longer claimed it. Do you still hear it? He asked quietly. I hesitated. Sometimes. He nodded. Me too. Neither of us elaborated. We didn't have to. The hum came rarely now. Soft pulses felt more than heard, rising from the base of my spine like a memory brushing the back of my skull. Always faint, always brief. A reminder, a warning. After an hour or so, Mason stood to leave. "If you ever need anything," he said, "I'm only a call away." I nodded. He didn't ask why I never called. Winters came hard that far up the mountain, and the cold months sharpened all my senses. Snow muffled the world until the quiet felt absolute, a blanket across the land. But even then, late at night, a faint tremor sometimes brushed the soles of my feet as though something deep underground shifted in its sleep. One particular night, wind rattling the windows and the fire burning low, I heard it again, the hum, soft, deliberate, pressing against the baseboards like water forcing its way through wood. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. It didn't last long, just 3 tones spaced evenly apart. The same pattern that started everything. But the mind was gone, sealed, collapsed, and yet the sound pulsed through my cabin as though the mountain no longer cared about geological barriers. The next morning, I drove to town for the first time in weeks. The streets were quiet, coated in a thin glaze of frost that cracked under my boots. I passed the high school just as a group of teens gathered near the parking lot, trading stories with the kind of reckless excitement only youth can muster. "I swear we're singing," one boy whispered, "near the old ridge. Last night. No way. The place is sealed." Still heard it, like someone humming from inside a cave. My blood went cold. "Probably coyotes," another teen said. "Coyotes don't hum." I stepped closer, and their conversation died instantly. They recognized me, even without the badge. Some nodded respectfully. Others stared warily, as if unsure whether I was a legend or a cautionary tale. "You kids hear something strange up by Black Ridge?" I asked. The first boy nodded. "Yeah, like music. Not loud, just weird." "When?" "Last night." I swallowed. "Stay away from that ridge. Understand?" They nodded quickly. But teenagers nodding doesn't mean teenagers listening. Driving home, I found myself turning onto the old mine road before I realized what I was doing. Snow crunched beneath the tires. The new fencing stood strong, tall, reinforced, topped with barbed wire. But the mountain behind it looked unchanged. Timeless, patient, waiting. I parked and walked to the fence, gripping the cold metal with both hands. The ground beneath my boots trembled faintly. Not a quake, not instability. A pulse, a heartbeat, an echo of something that refused to die. "You should have stayed buried," I whispered. But the wind carried my words away as though the mountain hadn't heard them, or worse, as though it had and simply didn't care. A memory flashed. Mason standing entranced at the chasm, the mirrored entity rising behind him like a shadow given form, the collapse sealing it away. Elias singing the old rites, offering himself. The debt had not been paid, only delayed. I drove home and tried to lose myself in routine, splitting wood, patching the roof, fixing a loose cabinet hinge. But everything felt hollow, brittle, as if the hum had eroded my connection to the world piece by piece. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, going cold in my hands. The forest stretched quiet and dark around me. Snow drifted from the branches in slow, gentle sheets. Then I felt it, not heard, felt a deep vibration, subtle as a heartbeat against the ribs of the earth. It traveled through the ground, up my legs, into my spine. 3 tones, faint, even, a whisper rising from beneath my land. I closed my eyes. It wasn't coming from Black Ridge anymore. It was everywhere. The mountain had branches, veins, hidden caverns stretching for miles beneath Boone County. The collapse had sealed one entrance, not the entity. It had simply redirected, shifted, adapted, and now, after years of silence, it was reaching out again. I stood slowly, heart pounding. "Not now," I whispered. "Not again." The hum faded, leaving only the sigh of the wind. But I knew what it meant. The mountain was awake. The debt was still owed. Elias's last words echoed through my mind. It's searching. And now that it found a way to carry its voice beyond the ridge, beyond the mine, beyond the old boundaries, it would search wider, deeper, further, until it found what it believed belonged to it. Me, or Mason, or someone else tied into the lineage of loss. I stared at the distant silhouette of Black Ridge, just barely visible between the trees. Snow swirled across the horizon, catching faint traces of twilight. For the first time in years, I felt something cold settle into my bones. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The mountain wasn't done. And I knew, with a certainty that hollowed me out, that whatever came next would demand more than silence, more than distance. It would demand something I wasn't sure I could give. The hum rose again, just for a moment. A flicker of sound curled like a beckoning finger. I stepped back into the cabin. Tomorrow, I would face whatever waited beneath Boone County, because debts don't vanish. They echo, and this one was getting louder. If you stayed with me this far, you deserve to know why I started writing all of this down. I didn't intend to. For years after Black Ridge, silence felt like the only shield I had left. Silence meant the mountain couldn't track me. Silence meant the past stayed buried. Silence meant I could pretend the hum was fading. But silence lies. And lately, the humming has returned. Not the full chorus, not yet, but faint tremors that nudge the walls, soft pulses that shiver through the foundation of my cabin late at night. Sometimes it comes as 3 tones, spaced evenly apart, like a memory tapping at the door. Other times at a low vibration running through the floorboards that stops the moment I stand, as if whatever's beneath my land is paying attention. It's listening again, and that means it's waking. I'm not writing this for catharsis. I'm writing it for whoever finds this, because someone will, because the hum will spread the way water spreads under a cracked door. You won't know it's there until it's seeped into all the places that matter. Appalachia remembers its debts. That's something outsiders don't understand. They drive through the mountains, snap photos of the overlooks, marvel at the mist and the shadowed hollows. But they don't feel the weight in the rock. They don't hear the breath under the ridges. They don't know the stories buried beneath generations of men who dug too deep and listened too closely. But you do now. You know enough to be cautious, if not safe. I wish I could say the danger ended with a mind collapse, that the mountain took what it wanted and went dormant again. But the humming in my cabin started 2 weeks ago. Subtle at first, like pipes settling. Then clearer, resonant, unmistakably patterned. And the mirrors. I didn't notice it the first time, though maybe I didn't want to. I walked past a hallway mirror carrying firewood, and something the glass fell off, not visibly, just perceptibly, like my reflection was watching me leave rather than matching my movement. I blamed exhaustion, stress, memory. But 3 nights ago, the lag became obvious. I turned off the living room lamp before bed, and in the darkened window, I saw myself standing fully upright even though I was halfway bent toward the switch. A half-second delay, no more. Enough to raise the hairs on my arms. Enough to make me flick the light back on and stare into the glass until my eyes ached. My reflection behaved then, perfectly obedient, perfectly synchronized, as though it had been caught doing something it shouldn't. I tried every rational explanation I could muster. Faulty depth perception, fatigue, reflections from other angles, tricks of low light. But deep down I recognized the truth. I'd seen delayed reflections before. In the mind, in the chamber, on the slate skin of the entity that rose behind Mason. The mind marked me. It didn't let go. Some nights I wake to the faintest hum threading itself through my dreams. A single pulse at first, then 2, then the familiar 3. Sometimes they echo behind my ears long after I've opened my eyes. Sometimes I swear I hear a voice curled inside the tone, low, rhythmic, layered with static. Say my name the way Mason claimed he heard his grandfather saying his. The land feels watchful again. Even the animals know something's shifting. Deer avoid the clearing behind my cabin. The foxes that used to try to cross my porch have vanished. At night, the woods quiet in a way forests aren't supposed to. No insects, no owls, just a slow groan of old branches shifting under invisible weight. I check the ground for tremors each morning. Sometimes I feel nothing. Other times, a faint vibration pulses under my boots. Always 3 beats. Always the same measured rhythm. It is not the earth. It is not wind. It is not imagination. It is recognition. Last week, Mason called me for the first time in years. His voice cracked in the middle of the greeting, like he was afraid to speak what mattered. "You hear it too?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. I heard him swallow, breath shaky. "Just once or twice," he finally whispered. Same pattern. "Stay vigilant," I told him. "Sheriff, what if it wants us back?" I didn't know what to say. I still don't. Mason visited the next day. His hands trembled when he reached for his coffee mug. He joked about poor sleep, joked about nightmares, but when he turned his head toward the hallway mirror, he stiffened, the color draining from his face. He'd seen it too. The delay, the mimicry, the reflection learning us. He left quickly that afternoon, saying he needed to check on something in town. I haven't heard from him since. Maybe he's avoiding me because seeing me reminds him of the mine. Or maybe he's avoiding me because he knows what comes next. Because he knows the hum doesn't return without purpose. Because he knows the debt wasn't settled. Elias warned me years ago. The mountain takes what you owe. He didn't say what happens when you owe twice. Or 3 times. Or when your bloodline carries the weight of more than one sin. The ground has started shifting again. Not visibly. Not violently, but perceptibly. A slow ripple now and then, a twitch in the earth beneath the house, like something stretching after a long sleep. The wind, too, has changed, no longer passing evenly through trees, but moving in pockets, in pulses, in breath-like waves. I think the mountain is calling, not loudly, not yet, but insistently, patiently, and I don't know whether my silence or my voice will bring it faster. There's one more thing you need to understand, something I put off admitting even to myself. Last night, as I passed the bathroom mirror, I caught my reflection smiling. I wasn't. The expression flickered. Too quick to be fully conscious, too wrong to be accidental. A stretched, knowing smile, a reflection mirroring not my face, but something else's intent. I shut the door and didn't look again, but I still felt it smiling long after the light was off. I'm writing all this now because I don't know how much time I have before the humming reaches its full voice again. Because once it does, I don't know if I'll be able to think clearly enough to finish. Because someone, anyone, needs to know what Boone County tried to bury. You may think distance will save you. That this is a local story, a regional curse, a relic of mining days long gone. But sound travels. Stone remembers. And whatever stirs beneath Appalachia doesn't obey borders. If you've ever heard a vibration in the earth that you couldn't explain, if you've ever seen your reflection hesitate for a fraction of a second, if you've ever felt watched by something older than the land itself, then listen to me now. This isn't superstition. This isn't grief. This isn't a warning I give lightly. This is the truth, spoken plainly, before the hum grows strong enough to drown it out. If you ever hear the coal seam sing, don't look for the source. It's already looking for you.